Hey, welcome to Building SaaS with Python and Django. My name's Matt Lehman. I am the streamer for this stream, and we work on a Django application. And I teach you what I know about it, and we go through an ongoing project that's deeper than a tutorial, but not so deep that you would be totally lost. So we're in this process of radically changing my deployment for my site. Context, my site is called College Conductor. The details of this really don't matter for you tonight, but because we're going to be deep into databases and Postgres and backups, and none of that matters for the domain except to know that data is there. So why am I doing this? The deployment process for my site. Hey, Vincent Martini, welcome. Thanks for joining in. The deployment process for my site is kind of clunky. It's got a lot of steps. I'm trying to cut that out. We've been going through this big, long process to strip that down and make it super simple with deploying a single thing to the site, and then getting all the benefits that come with that. And so I've been having to retool a lot of how I do my site, which is deployed to a Droplet on DigitalOcean. And we're getting down to the end of it, but we're finding all the little bits and bobs that I didn't consider when I was making this conversion process. And one of those was the database backup tool. And that's what we're going to be looking at tonight. So the tool is specifically called Wal-E. And let me see if I can find the GitHub page for that. And I guess I should pause. So if you enjoy what you find tonight and you want to see more, give me a follow on Twitch, or subscribe on YouTube when I post the content later. That helps me out and lets me know that you're watching and can get some value out of it. And you'll know when I'm streaming in the future, although I do stream pretty regularly on Wednesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern time. Okay, back to this. So Wal-E is a tool for Postgres doing backups, and you might wonder, like, what is that name all about? And it's specifically for WAL files. A WAL file, if I remember correctly, and see if it says it somewhere in this description. Maybe it doesn't. In Postgres, one of the type of files that they make is a WAL file. And you can see here it stands for the write-ahead log. So all the data that Postgres writes out before it's persisted to final storage into the database goes into this write-ahead log. And the write-ahead log is like a replay of, is my understanding, is like a replay of every action that happens with Postgres. And so if you want to do a proper real-time backup of all your content, you can do a dump from your database, but what you will miss is anything that was happening in that write-ahead log at the time when the database backup was occurring. So if you capture the log itself, the write-ahead log, then you can get a full and accurate database backup. Okay, so that's the concept behind the Postgres backup. There are other ways where you can do, like I mentioned, where you just dump the whole database, and maybe you care less about what's going on right now. But if you have any level of traffic on your site that is just constantly there, there's a chance for data loss, which you don't really want data loss. So this tool, Wal-E, is designed with the write-ahead log in mind. And it basically, what it is intended to do is to take snapshots of the write-ahead log in the entire version of it, and also in like the latest time slice of it, and push that all up to some storage platform of your choice. And you can see in their documentation here, it's got AWS, Azure, Google, Swift, which I believe is OpenStack stuff, and then just straight up file system. So if you have like a network file system with NFS or something like that. So Wal-E is a tool to take that write-ahead log, put it wherever you need to put it for safe keeping. So I use Wal-E for College Conductor, and I have to make some modifications to the way that I use Wal-E. Currently, I depend on the Wal-E executable that is installed. Wal-E is written in Python, so it is a package that is in the virtual environment that's on my server. But I am on this mission to totally remove the virtual environment altogether because I've packaged up my entire application into a single bundle called a Shiv app. And that's what I've spent a ton of time in previous streams going through all of the bits of how to do that for the web application server, how to do that for Celery, all this stuff. And so we need to manage these other tools that use the packages that are in that Python virtual environment, and Wal-E is kind of the last bastion of stuff that needs to be removed. So the job for this particular stream, if I can accomplish everything in the next hour to an hour and a half, is to make the scripts that use the database backup tool and tell them to use this bundle of code rather than the virtual environment that I have installed on the server, because ultimately that virtual environment is going to go away. So I'm going to drop the message in here about this is the issue that we're looking at, in case there's not a lot of details here, but I can give people a frame of reference. And if you want to ask me anything about Python or Django, please feel free. I also have if you're interested more in like Python stuff that I write about that is not necessarily related to this topic, but to the broader ecosystem, I do write regularly at mattlehman.com, tech posts about all sorts of stuff. I had a recent one on Starlet and doing async programming, and so if that sounds interesting to you, go check that out. There's a mailing list where you can keep up with me there, yada yada, all that cool stuff. So let's dig into some code, shall we? And look at the place where this stuff is used and figure out what we can do about it. So let me see what I've got left. What I was doing here, searching in Vim, was searching for the places where I use the virtual environment, which I have defined in my Ansible, which is my deployment tool, as the venv path. And so anything that's in this virtual environment needs to go. That's the goal. And you can see that Wal-E is part of the database backup stuff. So let's open up this task and see if that'll work. And it looks like we might have to modify some other stuff in a Postgres configuration file too. So there's definitely some work to do here. Let's start here. So there's two things that are going on here. This task, and let's kill that thing so you don't have to stare at two different files. This task right here, and I've named it appropriately, is a full backup of the database. So Wal-E operates at a couple of levels. It operates at the stuff that's like happening right now, and also the stuff that has happened historically. And the reason I think that it does that is because you can imagine, like, if all you had was the stuff that's happening right now, and right now, and right now, and you did that for the entire history of your database, and you just collected all these little deltas, putting your database together is going to be this big computational process to check out every tiny little chunk and get them to make the complete picture of a database. That process is not efficient. So what Wal-E does is saying, hey, every once in a while, just give me a full dump of what is already committed to the database, so we don't have to consider the entire write-ahead log in order to do the work. So if you take this full dump of the database plus the little delta of the write-ahead log, you can get the complete picture. So part of what I've got here is a cron job that is doing that backup, this backup push command. And so what we need to get rid of is this call right here, where it's calling into Wal-E as part and calling the backup push. And I've been thinking on what this is going to mean and how this is going to work. What we have to figure out is what that Wal-E executable is actually invoking. If we're lucky, it's invoking a setup tools console script. The console scripts, let's see, do I have an example? I don't know that I do, but we will check it out. I don't here. You know what? I know I have some somewhere else in some of my other projects, so let's look at some of my other code that has nothing to do with this, but that's okay. And we can dig into one of my other projects called Tappy, and check out the setup pie there, just so I can illustrate what we're talking about. Okay, here it is right here. So Python packaging has this interesting feature with setup tools, which is a very common packaging tool used with Python packaging, referred to as console scripts. And you can define this thing that's referred to as an entry point. An entry point says, if you give me a module path, which is what you see here, tap main, and the name of a function, kind of in this format of module path colon function name, setup tools will wrap that into an executable. And the executable, in this case, I've got two of them. One is named Tappy, and the other is named Tap. Don't worry about what this project is doing, totally unrelated to anything that we're going to go into. But the concept here is what's important, is that a package can define a console script. And so the effect of that is, let me make sure, we'll get into the virtual environment and I'll show you what I think this is going to do. I've got my staging environment set up in a virtual machine, and so all of the virtual environment that is the Python packages that get installed are in place over there. So if you have this console scripts feature, Python is smart enough, and setup tools is smart enough to make an executable file that is a very thin wrapper over that function that you gave it. And I mean, you saw in my project, mine was called main, which is a very common naming convention. So it's just the entry point into a program, kind of to bootstrap you. So if we go into the server machine here and check out the virtual environment, which is here, and look at bin. So let's actually navigate in that directory. So here are all the things that got installed from the Python packages that when I do a pip install. And let's check out the Wal-E one and see what it looks like under the hood. And this is pretty common. What's happening is setup tools created this file, and it creates all the boilerplate, the stuff on the top here, the stuff on the bottom here. All of that is created for you. The important part is what's right here, Wal-E command main. So that tells me right away that Wal-E is using a console script. And in fact, we can go confirm that. We can just go look at their source code, check out their setup.py file, and you can see, hopefully, matches to the same name. There is, where are you? Entry points. Oh, right at the bottom. Entry points console script. So it has made a binary or an executable file called Wal-E, and it points to the Wal-E package with the command module and the main function. And just to complete the whole loop, just so we're very clear on what's going on, there we're in the Wal-E package now. There is the command module, CMD, and somewhere in here is main. Yeah, right here. So that's what console scripts do, and that's a way a lot of Python packages create an executable, something that you can use. Maybe you're using pre-commit or something to that effect, and I'm feeling that all of these tools rely on this feature of setup tools to get a main entry point. Why did I bring all that up? Well, if you recall, we have packaged things up into a Shiv bundle. And in previous streams, I have used a main file in my conductor thing to dispatch to different functionality. And I've done that to dispatch to GUnicorn right here. I've done it to dispatch to Django's manage commands and to Celery. And I did that and wired that all in here. And the reason I did some of that, I probably didn't need to do all of this, but the reason I did some of that is that I'm not sure that there was a console script for some of these things. Maybe I'm wrong, but this is the path that I took. In reading the Shiv documentation, I found is that there's other ways that you can approach this. Shiv works by bundling your code together and creating a PYZ file, an archive of a zip archive of all your code compressed into a single thing. And then when you want to use it, you invoke it like a binary and it tries to run whatever it was initially configured with. However, this is the big however, you can change that with some environment variables. And here we see that influencing the runtime. So the one that I want to try and use is this Shiv entry point. And I mean, if we read the documentation here, it should start to look very familiar with what we were just talking about. A setup tools style callable. That's exactly what was in that console scripts thing. And where they give an example of, a module path, module.main. So that would be, some package called module with a main.py, and then in there would be a main function. Okay, so now we have the pieces that I think that we need in order to invoke the Shiv app and make it pretend to be the Wal-E executable. That's really what we're going for. So if we get back to our place where Wal-E was used, right here, where we're invoking the virtual env path with the bin Wal-E script file, we need to change that. And if anybody's catching up later, I'm actually going to add a couple of notes, and this might be useful for me later for show notes. So if we're starting to talk about this, the wall is the write ahead log, in case you're curious, and this is for Postgres Backups. Just want to give a little breadcrumb trail for anybody visiting later. So let's look at how this task is working. So we've got a cron task in here that is making this job call, and it's got this current name. I think the name is what's going to be the hint for Ansible to find out what to replace, if I recall correctly. So when we're done with this, we should not have like 2 cron jobs in place. We needed to verify this, but we should have a single cron job. And it's doing, there's actually quite a bit going on here. It's using this tool called envdir. It's tough for me to say. Envdir is designed to read a file. In this case, the file is in etc Wal-E env, which I've created up above, right here. Or I'm sorry, that's a directory. In that directory are a bunch of individual files, and the individual files each contain a value. And you can see what those things map to. They map to what would be environment variables that you want to use. So envdir works by saying, give me a directory. That directory has a bunch of files named just whatever the environment variable name is, and the only content in that file is going to be the value of that environment variable. So if you point envdir at a directory and then provide a command after that, then the command that is executed is going to have those environment variables available to it. It would be as if let's get to a terminal. As if I typed AWS, or what do we got? AWS access key ID is, whatever the value is with my binary, executable file, which would then mean that AWS access key is available to that executable. So it's almost like just injecting all of those things in there for the environment. So we want to continue to use envdir because Wal-E, the tool, is expecting to find these environment variables in order to do its job. So that doesn't change. So this line right here at 108 remains the same. That's all cool. What does have to change is we want to stop pointing to the virtual env path and start pointing to the Shiv executable. And we also need to give the Shiv executable the Shiv entry point, this thing. So here's, and as I'm looking at this, I'm starting to see ways that I can quickly address this. I think what we want to do is this is not trivial necessarily. We want to ditch this, and the Shiv executables are stored in serve apps conductor pyz. That's kind of the universal name that is a symbolic link that I've created elsewhere that will point at the latest Shiv executable. Okay, so that's the new executable. That's the replacement Wal-E. But the way that this is running right now, it's not actually going to do the job, because when conductor pyz is called without any modifications, it thinks it's the application server, and that's wrong. So I think what I want to do is modify the envdir to have a new environment variable in it, and that's going to be Shiv entry point. So we'll come up here, we'll create it, we'll copy that line, we're going to rename it to Shiv entry point, and the value is going to be the same thing that was in the Shiv setup file. So let's go back over there, and it's Wal-E _.cmd, yeah, this whole thing. So we want to take this part right here, copy that, and put it in here. So that is that piece of the equation. And at this point, I think I'm tempted to go ahead and test this out and go inspect the cron entry. I always struggle with reviewing cron stuff anyway, so it's a good exercise to see how we can get to the cron tab. I think it's a root cron job, so yeah. Although this is skipped, well, that's annoying. This is skipped when it's a staging environment. It's only for production. So we can probably we might have to hack this one in. I'm gonna comment out this line so that it adds this thing, and then we'll just go delete it once we verified that it's there. I don't expect this to run because it's not Sunday at 2 in the morning, which is what this is indicating. So this should be fine to add and then remove, so that I'm not uploading my staging local stuff to my Amazon S3 bucket. We're kind of just verifying that all the pieces are in place for production. Okay, let's do it. I think we're ready now to check things out. And we've got the modification. We're adding the new environment variable. We're changing things to use the Shiv app instead of the virtual environment. And we're temporarily adding this even though it's not the production environment. This is one of the rare cases in my deployment process where I have a task that is only accessible on production, because I was being cheap about storage, frankly, if I'm going to be truthful. I didn't want to have to deal with storing dummy data that I didn't care about and getting charged for it. So that's why this is there. So it's a little bit more fiddly to test out, but that's okay. So in order to run Ansible on the staging environment in the virtual machine, I run Vagrant provision because Vagrant is configured to use Ansible as its provisioning tool in the Vagrant file. And it's going to do its thing, hopefully. And we'll let that run for a minute. And while it's doing that, I can just, why not? I can show you the Vagrant file just to prove that how that's connected. So Vagrant has its provision block here that tells it what provisioner to use. And I've configured it to use Ansible and pointed at a bunch of stuff that we don't really care about for this stream, but that's just to show that how Vagrant provision is wired to Ansible. Because when I do my actual deployment, which I do with Ansible deploy, you can see what it's really doing is saying use Ansible playbook as the command with the production inventory and start with the playbook that is defined by the site YAML file. Don't worry about that if it doesn't make sense. It's okay. I'm not really going over Ansible too much today. And if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. Happy to chat about more than Postgres, although please keep it to Django and Python if you don't mind. Now let's see, I guess we're already in the web role, so let's go up to the database role. And yep, you can see it right here. It set the environment variables, and all the other ones were already there, so those aren't new. But it did add that cron job, which is good. And since that's done, we don't need to worry about the rest of the deployment. We'll just let that finish on through. And over here, we'll go into Vagrant, the virtual machine, and check things out. So what we're interested in here is two things. Let's switch to the root user. And the first thing to check was etc, Wal-E, then there's an env directory. And here you can see how the stuff manifests when in real usage. I'm not going to export these things because they are real key values, so I can't show you those. Those are actual secrets, and I don't feel like rotating my keys. But I can show if I cat the Shiv entry point, you can see it doesn't format well because there's no new line at the end of it, but the value in there was Wal-E command :main, which is exactly what we want. And then to inspect that the cron job is there, let's go to the cron tab and I guess I need to give it an editor, whatever. It did not put it there. Why not? I would have expected to see the cron tab entry, so why was that not added? Maybe it was a different role for that user. Cron present. Oh, so we have to do it. Look at that. Add it from the Postgres user. So let's go over here and switch user to Postgres. Now we're the Postgres user, and the reason that was so possible, and I guess I should add, so like sudo switch user with a dash will switch to the root account, which is not something you want to do, but it's okay for staging. So that's what I did, and then once you're a root, you're basically whoever you want to be. So then I did a switch user to Postgres to become the Postgres user. So that's what's going on. So now if we do, if you want to look at cron entries, you do that with cron tab, sorry, I'm trying to make this formatted well for the chat. Cron tab -E is when you want it to be editable, I think is what that stands for. In fact, yeah, you can see cron tab, and then you can actually list it out. So we could do, let's try it out, cron tab L. So there's the command. Using the environmentor, it's using the environment, that's not changing, but it's now pointing at serves apps conductor PYZ and taking the backup push, which is all good. So, and to look at that in the entirety, let's do serve apps, and you can see the symlink. There's a symbolic link from conductor PYZ to the latest installed PYZ file. So cool. I actually do want to edit that though. Stupid printer's going over there. It just decides to like randomly start at night sometimes for no reason. Good job, HP. And let's delete this because I don't actually want this to be happening. Let's kill that. So now if I could do a cron tab list, it should not be there, which is good. So it's not actually going to try and export stuff to AWS. So if we come back to the configuration, I think I'm basically at this point convinced that that's done. This is a thing that I'll probably just deploy and verify that it worked later. I'm pretty confident in it. And there's probably ways that we could test out cron tab and explore all that, but I just don't really feel like it. So I'm going to put down here as a note. Gosh, that's so annoying. Verify that Wal-E full backup works from cron job. So that's something we can check on later. So that's step one in the process. We'll add that here. Now, we're not done though. We have to go down to this archive command. And, well, you know, this might actually be just as easy. So because, this is really cool. I'm liking how nicely this is coming together. Because we did this modification to the environment where it's running and added the Shiv entry point here, I think what we need to do here is change this to serve apps conductor PYZ. And I think that's it. That will change our archive command. The archive command is what is dealing with the write-ahead log. So archiving is all about, well, the write-ahead log, frankly. I don't know how else to say that. And I'm trying to see if there's anything else that we can deduce from this config file. It doesn't look like it. But this is how you turn on the backup process, is using this. I believe Postgres defaults to having this off because it needs to know where you want to put this stuff, and it needs to know what command you want to use to get this stuff out. So in the absence of that information, it can't do anything, so it just does its best and records the data to the Postgres data area. So we have this on for deployment because I don't need it on for staging. So if we did another staging deploy right now, we wouldn't actually see it. But again, I'm going to kind of trust that this is doing the right thing and verify that it is pushing up the partials. So as a reminder, the task that was in the Ansible playbook is doing the full backup. That's what the backup push is. And here, yeah, notice that the command name is different. A backup push versus a wall push. The backup is the full thing, and that's why I'm only doing it once a week on a late time of day or early time of the morning on Sunday, because it's more data, and I just don't need to store all of that data. So that means that if I ever had a massive crash of the system, all I would need to do is the latest full backup from a Sunday plus whatever wall stuff was pushed up during the day. And I want to say that this pushes up for however much content is produced. Like it will, if there's enough wall that's generated, write ahead log that's generated, it'll push up that segment with the archive command. Or I say push, it'll call whatever the archive command is. In my case, that means pushing up content to Amazon S3. But it can be whatever. If it's stored into your local file, NFS, whatever. That's just what it's doing. So it either does that when there's enough data that has happened because you have a higher volume of traffic, or after a pre-configured timeout. My site is particularly low traffic, so it's not generating a ton of write-ahead log. So by saying 3600, that is saying every hour, because I believe it's in seconds. So every hour I'm putting up a new chunk of wall log. So in a week, I guess whatever that is, 24 times 7, and is that 100? Well, whatever. I don't feel like doing the math. Not a huge amount of data. And yeah, I think that's it. So we've got that modification there. And we have no other, I want to say, let's look up the virtual environment. So we have no other use of it anymore, except where it is installing stuff, which is cool, and where it's defined. So that's great. So let's commit this work. We're going to modify Wal-E backups to use what? Use the Shiv app. Sorry, brain's getting a little worn out today. And in the end, that was an addition of a new environment variable and switching the binary to use the Shiv app. Pretty straightforward. So cool. I was frankly expecting that to be harder, but I think I was also expecting us to have to test more, and I'm realizing that that's not really possible. So what should we do now? Let's step back and look at the bigger picture. I'm going to close this Wal-E tab, and we're done with Postgres, and I think we might even be done looking at Shiv stuff for a moment. We're getting down, we're continuing to peel back to the pieces that matter. And I think while I can't verify this today, I guess I should add verify the incremental backup. Okay. And I'll report back, I guess, if this doesn't actually do what I think it does. Because there's a chance that it just fails spectacularly, and I don't know why. Okay. So what's left? We have this step of removing the virtual environment. And what that'll do is it will speed up deployment, because part of deployment right now is doing a pip install of what is in the Git clone and putting it in that virtual environment. And we can remove, this is nice. This will be interesting and tricky though. We have the ability to remove development packages related to the virtual environment. because remember, or maybe you don't remember if you're new to the stream, we have pushed all of the work of building the code, the Python code, to Circle CI, Continuous Integration Service. So in theory, that means that the development packages that need to be used to compile stuff for the target platform are no longer needed. So we can also potentially remove those as well. So let's start working on that project. What is that going to mean? First thing it's going to mean is this thing right here, where we are removing the virtual environment itself. So we take this out. It's kind of a short one. And I think that's it. This could be the most satisfying and simplest stream at the same time. We'll see. That removes the virtual environment. But we have to, so hooray, success. One task down, but a ton of work that it represented to do that. Sometimes getting that last little bit of work is trivial, but it's all the work that led up to it that was the real work in the process. So what's left? We have to start to think about what packages were installed because of that. And hopefully, maybe, I have this note here, but I'm not sure which of this is actually necessary versus not. So let's think through this. We needed pip to install stuff. That won't be needed, that's for sure. We needed virtual env to create a virtual environment. Yeah, I think that was more a function of Ansible using the virtual env tool rather than the built-in venv module that's in Python 3. Now, this one is a little bit trickier that I'm not so sure about. And I think it might need to stay, because one of the things that we have to do is download from S3. That's the way that we're getting the app. That's like the bootstrapping process that we need. So if we don't have Bodo installed, then we can't even get the Shiv app itself from S3. So I think that might need to stay, but let's change the name. Let's change it to, instead of package tools, let's call it bootstrapping tools. Okay. Let's see. I'm looking at this other stuff. We may be able to get rid of psychopg2, that's the database driver, because I believe that was packaged up into the requirements file, but let's check it out. It's not in there, but I also had a production include. So here's this psychopg2 that's here. Okay. Well, now we're going to potentially get pretty interesting. And I say that because the thing that might be next to do is to destroy the whole staging environment and start afresh. That's a big hammer to pull out, though, so I'm going to think on that before I do it. And I'm considering that route because when you do Ansible, the fact that I took out a task doesn't mean that a package is magically uninstalled. It just means that it's not checked to ensure that it's there anymore. So it will just exist as its current state. So this is really protecting against like future installations of the server. So I'm not clear. I haven't tried to do a clean install top to bottom in a while. And so that might be an interesting exercise. So I think this will go away, but I'm not positive. So I'm going to comment it out and leave it like that for a minute. And if we review the rest of this thing, it's creations of directories, it's fetching from GitHub, setting stuff about supervisor, copying settings around, and then running commands and those sort of things. Don't think there's anything in here that is really gonna change. Famous last words, right? So let's look at the worker tasks and see if there's anything in there. Nope, just celery. So nothing to do in there. The messaging, RabbitMQ is not changing in this process, so that's staying the same. The load balancer is all related to certificates and all of that stuff, so I don't think any of this stuff is changing. Still creating certs and all of that business. Nothing Python related in here that I can think of. And the last one that really is worth checking is the database tasks. So, well, this is interesting. There's some stuff needed for Wal-E, stuff for Postgres, and there's this what I'm most curious in is this install Postgres task that is installing libpqdev. I'm thinking that may not be necessary because we're not, well, I don't know. To stay on the slightly the safe side, I will leave it. But we're gonna go nuclear and see how much this blows up on my face. It's probably been like a year since I've destroyed the VM, so this will be fun. So what have we done? We've removed a couple things from our bootstrapping tools, removed the Python dependencies. We've commented out the need to install psychopg2, and because we think we're going to rely on that from the Shiv app bundle. So if I do this and destroy this file, or destroy this whole virtual machine, and try it again and do vagrant up will start a new virtual machine and immediately run the vagrant provision command. And the vagrant provision command will then run through my entire set of Ansible playbooks to recreate the staging environment. And again, I've not done this in a while, so why not? This will at least be good for a laugh. So let's destroy it and say yep. Okay, so easy to destroy. Let's see if my automation is actually good or bad to bring it back up. And this could take a while, so we'll be patient and we'll talk through stuff. Hopefully it doesn't have to go fetch a new box. It's just going to download the one it has. So we're starting a whole new virtual machine. It's booting it up. It's got nothing in it anymore. So fresh slate, fresh Ubuntu instance. And Ansible provision is going to run through the roles. And since this could potentially take a while, let's look at how that process is going. So under the covers, things are using Ansible playbooks. That's the command, Ansible playbook, if you're curious. If we look at the playbooks and go up to the top and also bring up the Vagrant file to do a side-by-side comparison, we can see a couple of things. We can see the inventory. The inventory is named development, and that file is right here. And development says everything is going to be called web01. It's going to be the local host. There's the port. There's the Vagrant user. And it's going to get every role that matters. In other words, I'm saying like it's just a single virtual machine running the whole system. And so do all the work on that. That's what the inventory is. The second part here is saying what, I guess what the groups are. I don't remember why I had to specify this versus what's over here, honestly. Yeah, frankly, I just don't recall. It's been too long. The next thing that's saying is run the site, the playbook site file. Oh, good. It's doing stuff over here. What's it doing? Oh, it's doing guest editions. Okay, so that'll take a minute. So we have to look at what the site file is. The site is the same thing that's used on my production deployment. And it is a list that will go down in order of all of the pieces that are needed for my entire site. That's the database. That's RabbitMQ, which is used for the message bus for handing off front-end stuff to the back-end workers. That's the web server itself. The workers, which do the back-end processing. And then finally the load balancer, which is the piece that talks to the outside world and that the web application servers talk to. And it's usually where we do TLS termination, secure connection handling, and all the certificate management stuff. So that's what goes into the site file. And then finally, I had to do this little trickery here to get Ansible to know where Vagrant had created the private key that was used for this particular virtual machine. So that's what's going on. We're waiting for packages to download. Riveting streaming. Yeah, so this is what we're gonna do. And this will help prove out if we've cleared out enough of the packages that are part of the process that we don't need any longer. It's not going to convince us of everything, but it'll get a bunch. So I think while that is running, let's talk about what else is left. So if I bring us back up to the whole point of this whole process, the flow of deployment used to look like this. The Ansible did a clone on the deployment server of my main repository, and the clone got all of its data on there, and the entire site worked out of that. It's a simplistic model, and it's pretty. It works for a long time, but there were some downsides to it. It just meant my deployment took a long time because it had to do all of the bootstrapping on my server, all of the package installation for Python, all of the package installation for JavaScript, all of the static asset compilation for JavaScript, everything. All of that stuff was done on the server. This process, this thing is, yeah, it was a good question, He Who Watched. It was a Git clone, and it's still there. So I can actually, let's check that out. So the Ansible task to do that is going to be, where's that going to be? Where are you, Git? There's Git. Yeah. So clone is just like the generic Git name to make a local copy. It's not a fork. Fork is like, well, I guess technically everything is a fork. Fork and clone are sort of synonyms. But if you think about like in the GitHub world, fork is like when you are doing a clone into a different account. I don't know if that helps you. So the operation that happens here and what Ansible is doing under the covers is calling git clone on this path right here. So now I'm sorry, I don't understand your question. I apologize. I'm not hosting it. It's it pulls the information from GitHub and puts it on my deployment server. And then every time I commit new changes locally for my development, it goes to the GitHub repository first, and then deployment says, okay, give me the latest stuff from GitHub, if that makes sense. So that's the part that's going away. Like all the clone work will be ripped out of the deployment server because I'm doing all of the work now in continuous integration. And the deployment part is going to say, instead of going to GitHub and getting the source and then doing all the work there locally, it's going to go to Amazon S3 and pull down the work that is already done, the compiled assets, the installed packages. All of that will be in a single bundle. Hope that makes more sense. So now we're running through. Okay, so it's installed the guest editions, which is just helps VirtualBox and my operating system talk nicer together, my host operating system, and we're running from start to finish. It's gone through the database role here. Oh, okay, no problem. Different chat. I was a little confused, but I think we both were, so it's okay. It's cool. So it's gone through the database server role, and it finished all that. So it installed Postgres. It installed all of the backup stuff that we just did tonight, and restarted Postgres. And now we're at this step where it's installing RabbitMQ, which is it's the message bus, which is a weird jargon industry name for when you get a request, kind of comes into your web application server, and if there's something that takes a super long time, the web application server says, I don't want to do this work, and it puts a task on a queue, and that queue is RabbitMQ, which is the thing we're installing, and then a different process called Celery, our Celery worker, will then pull the work off and say, I can do the work when time is available. So I'm not sure why it's taking a while to install that. Maybe we're just gonna have to be patient, trying to explain what's going on in the process. So what I'm hoping to see out of this whole thing is a top to bottom successful deployment to be able to go into the virtual machine with Vagrant SSH and kick the tires, check that things are correct and install them in proper places, and hopefully also visit the staging URL that I have configured for my local browser and see that it's correct there. So to complete this entire project, then the last thing that we'll have to do is remove the git clone. And there's going to be some some interesting work in there. The actual removal, just like the removal of virtual environment, should be really easy. The harder bit will be getting the SHAs that we need to pull. And that makes probably no sense if you haven't been watching previous streams. You can see here that when we do this fetch, it's registering the content of what was fetched. And in this fetch is a little bit of data about, like, here's the latest SHA that was pulled. And it's a unique identifier that we can use so that it knows down in later steps what file to attempt to pull from S3. So we have this problem of, if this step is gone, how do we get this SHA, this identifier? I don't know yet. I'll probably have to research that offline. I suspect there's a way that we can query GitHub and check on the latest SHA, but I'm not sure, frankly. The nice part about it should be that we won't need to do, like, in order to do this clone, I had to have a special deployment key, because you might, if you've done enough Git work, you can recognize that this style of URL is an SSH style URL. It's over the SSH protocol. So this didn't work unless I put a deployment key in there. I'll be able to remove that, hopefully, because I won't need it anymore. And yeah, once that's gone, it should just be, I hope, query a public repo endpoint to say what is the latest SHA that's out there, because the Circle CI should always be keeping parity with, like, here's an artifact available for that version. And if that's the case, then it's more of a query to a public facing thing, because my project is publicly available on the internet. So it's a nice convenience of not having a private repository. All right, check on the progress of that, see how it's doing. Oh, cool, we're making some headway. So it finished installing Rabbit. It set up the account for RabbitMQ, the virtual host, and the user. And then we entered the web server's role, and part of that was doing a swap file thing that, frankly, I probably don't need anymore. This swap file, when I started on DigitalOcean, I started with a smaller instance that had a maximum of 512 megabytes was the droplet size. And that's $5 a month, whatever. The problem was I needed to start from the beginning. There's a lot to this, so I apologize. I'm kind of deep in the weeds of how this whole deployment is going, so you can glean what you can. So when I was doing all of this building on the server, Node.js was part of that. And Node doesn't exactly have a reputation for being memory friendly. I'll put it that way. So I would do an npm install, and the process would fail. And the reason the process would fail is that I would hit the peak memory of the whole server. I'll use all 512 megabytes. But swap files are not configured by default on droplets, because that's a waste of disk for them. So there's a way to turn that on, and it allowed me to, when npm used more than that maximum memory, it could kind of burst up to that and then come back down and get out of swap territory. Swap is a way to use hard disk if you don't have enough memory available, because the operating system requires memory to do its operations, and and has nowhere else to go but except for a slow hard disk. So two things have happened that have probably changed the need for that. One, I'm not going to be doing npm installs on there anymore, or any npm work. All that's happening on CI now. So that's one change. The other change is that in the time frame since I've had this droplet online, DigitalOcean has improved their entire infrastructure so that the baseline droplet is now at a full gigabyte of memory. And I was peaking out at somewhere like 800 megabytes when I needed it for npm. So probably not needed at all, but I haven't removed it. But that's what this swap file thing is. Datadog is the monitoring service for checking on CPU, memory, disk usage, all that good stuff. So I use them as a service, which is pretty cool. And they have a role that you can just bring in and it does all the work for you. And then we get down to the actual web work. So it's installing Supervisor, installing Git, installing the tools, and all of this stuff is indicating that it's changed without any failures. That's looking good. And my PC is revved down, so it's probably done with deployment. So it fetched the app, restarted it all, and moved on to the workers, restarted those, went to the load balancer, and set everything up there, and dun-da-da-da, we're at the end. That's cool. Let's look at it, see if it's there. There it is, running, start to finish. The totally new virtual machine running a website. I still get satisfied when I see that. I didn't have to configure anything. One button deploy, one command deploy, I should say. It doesn't have any users right now. I don't have it bootstrapped with data. So there's a command I could run to bootstrap it with an account, but I'm convinced right now that everything we did was what we want. So let's come in here and do that final cleanup on the web file and delete this thing. And that gets rid of the extra stuff. So we can do that. Will check off this one as well. And there's no more virtual environment on my deployment site, which is really, really cool. So we'll add that to version control and commit it. And we'll say remove virtual env from deployment. And this fixes, what number was that? 378. Cool. Where does that leave us? That leaves me with two tasks. One is to verify, push that up. Okay. That leaves me with this verification task to make sure that my database backups are going. At some point I should do the other side of the test where I'm trying to restore from actual live data. And that should be possible with basically going through this process of totally destroying a staging environment, giving it a blank slate of a database, and then running through the restore process with my data from S3. I'm not going to do that tonight, but that's how you would do that. So I will check the verification. I'll do a deploy actually after everything goes green from Circle CI, and make sure that it gets out there. And then the next time that I will stream, we're going to go through this final step of removing the git clone. And I think after that git clone is out, we'll have a bunch of little pieces that will be parts that we can clean up that are elsewhere, little bits of refactoring of Ansible roles, stuff that used to be necessary will no longer be necessary. There will be a whole bunch of bits that go with that, which should bring us basically to the close of this whole milestone, which I've been spending many streams covering. And then we can start talking about next tasks. I've got a few ideas in mind already that I'm pretty excited about, but I don't want to put the cart before the horse. So that's bringing it to the end for tonight. If you found this useful or want to refer back to it, I will post the video on YouTube later. If you could give a follow or a like on YouTube if you catch it there, I would appreciate that. If you have any feedback, I'm happy to take that as well. I enjoy teaching and doing all this stuff, but I'm happy to find ways to instruct better. With that, I'll bid you good night, and I'll see you next time. Take care.